Tapesh, Tapesh, I'm sending you YouTube link. Just check YouTube link. Just check. Just check वो आ रही या नहीं. हाँ. ये देखो, ये देखो. हाँ. अभी देखो क्या दिख रहा है, देखो एक बार. Can you see me? Okay. नहीं. Okay. हाँ. हेलो. हाँ हाँ, पीछे ही चलता है वो. हेलो. हाँ. आप ब्लर रख देंगे. कोई भी नहीं ज्वाइन हो रहा. हाँ? नहीं, अभी एक ही ज्वाइन हुआ सब। हम दोनों ही है। अरे यार। Good evening, participants. We will start in 10 minutes. Good evening, participants. We will start in 10 minutes. We are waiting for the resource person to join. Thank you. Sir, good evening, sir. Sir, sir, would it be possible for you to join now? I have shared the link, sir. Hello. Oh, okay, sir. Okay. Hello. Sir, Sir, your voice is too low, sir. Okay, okay, sir. Then we will continue, sir. Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, good evening, sir. Sir, I am Krishna, sir, from India.
How are you?
I am fine, sir. How are you, sir?
Doing good. Well, I'm planning to log in just a couple of minutes, so I'm looking forward to seeing you online.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. We are online, sir. Participants are joining. So you can join in 5 minutes, sir.
Great. Okay, I will see you soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Bye, sir. Yes, sir. Dear participants, I just had a talk with our resource person. He said he will join shortly. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Good morning. Good evening. I am Brijesh Chan Srivastava.
Sir, am I audible, sir? Hello.
Yes, yes, you're audible. Yeah.
Sir, namaste, sir.
Ah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can hear you, sir.
Great. Okay. I think I had myself muted, perhaps. Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Krishna, for this invitation to speak and to meet with you. And I'm very glad to be here. Um,
Indeed, our opportunity to listen to you, sir. We are much privileged. So, before we start the session, dear participants, I am Krishna Shekhar Sharma. I am research scholar from Department of Law, Central University of Karnataka. We, in the name of SHORE, we are organizing these kind of research-oriented lectures, online sessions. SHORE is a non-profit students organization, Students for Holistic Development of Humanity. So we primarily focus on multidisciplinary and holistic approach to research for the development of the society. In this regard, we have approached Professor William Hubbard, sir. He is the professor from University of Chicago School of Law. So he accepted our invitation generously and he expressed his willingness to talk on how to write a research article. So now, sir, I request Miss Ragini Rajbar, she is also a fellow research scholar from same department, to introduce Professor William Hubbard to the audience. Ragini?
Good evening, sir. Actually, good morning to you, sir. Welcome
Thank
to the
you.
session. I'm Ragini Rajpur, research scholar at Department of Law, Central University of Karnataka. I welcome you, sir. Sir is a distinguished legal scholar and professor currently serving at the University of Chicago Law School. Sir has a background in both law and economics, and due to that, he brings a unique perspective to his academic work and research work as well. Sir has held various positions at reputable institutions such as Harvard Law School, and Sir has contributed significantly to the field through his publications, presentations at seminars, and workshops. Sir's expertise lies in the areas such as quantum economics, pleading models, and intersection of law and war. His educational backgrounds include PhD in economics from University of Chicago, JD with high honors from University of Chicago Law School, and economic degree from University of Southern California. Through his work and contribution to the legal field and economic discourse, Sir has established himself as a prominent figure in the academic community. Sir, I welcome you to the session. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Uh, and I'm very happy to be here and to talk about the ways to approach and the ways to think about and the ways to undertake writing a research article. I will begin actually by asking a question of you, and thank you for the introduction. It sounds like this is a group of primarily students who are in many different fields of research and study. But I want to make sure that I understand correctly who the group is here so that I can tailor my comments to the the needs and the context that this group brings. So the questions that I have for you before we begin are, am I correct that the group here is from a wide number of different disciplines and fields of study? Am I correct that this is primarily a group of students? And finally, the last question I have is what programs, what types of programs are you bachelor's degree students, master's degree students, PhD students? That would also be useful context for me as I speak.
Yes, sir. The audience are from various social sciences disciplines,
Mm-hmm.
and the audience includes research scholars, early research scholars, and faculty as well, teaching faculty.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. So with that in mind, I guess I'll begin by saying that there are some ways to approach writing a research scholarship that apply regardless of your degree program, that apply regardless of the field of social science or other research that you are involved in. But there are also aspects of your writing that certainly depend on the context in which you find yourself. And so you want to begin the process of formulating a research topic and thesis and developing a research agenda very much in mind, keeping in mind, who are you as a scholar? What are your goals as a scholar? And what audience are you trying to reach with your with your scholarship? I say that because there are countless topics to pursue in your research. I'm one of those people who finds basically every topic interesting and would be more than happy to spend time researching any topic in the law or social science and economics or any field really in order to write about it. But importantly, especially for an early career scholar, for somebody who is, for example, a PhD student or has completed a PhD and is pursuing research and attempting to find a permanent position at a research institution or at a university, it's very important to identify what your research agenda is going to be and pursue it in a way that's consistent with your career goals. And so, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, anytime you set out to conduct research and to eventually produce an article or other form of scholarship based on your research, you always want to have in mind who is your audience. And by audience, of course, all of us hope that when we write something, the entire world will read what we've written. But most important, though, is who are the people that you are going to make sure see your research, and who are the people that that you want most to reach and to understand what you've written and to be impressed by what you've written. I see somebody has raised a hand. I'm not sure how to respond to those kinds of messages. So please feel free to, Krishna, to interrupt me if there's something I should be doing in response to hands being raised.
Okay. No, it must be by mistake they must have.
Oh, okay. I'll keep going. Thanks. And so, and what I mean by that, particularly in the context of people who are research scholars, who are PhD students, who are early in their career, it's very important to keep in mind that the goal of your research in the long run, of course, is to affect our understanding of the world and to learn more about the world. However, there's another goal that you have in your research, especially early in your career, and that is to put yourself in a position to continue your research, to gain whatever type of employment it is that you're seeking with your education, whether it's in a research institute, in government, in law practice, or in an academic setting, in a university setting. And you have to then focus your research on what are those methods, what are those topics, what are those ways of writing that best impress those people who are in the position to hire you for whatever position you're going to be in. And I say that because we're all want to do research because we love to learn. We love knowledge, and that's the right reason to be doing research. However, if you want to be able to continue to do research in the long term, it's very important to make sure that you're doing in the short term what you need to do in order to continue to be able to do research in the long run. So before you even choose a topic, you have to have in mind, who's my audience, and what kinds of ideas do they want to see? What kinds of methods do they want to see employed? And so if you're a PhD student, for example, your primary audience isn't the world community of scholars. Your primary audience is going to be your thesis committee, right? Your thesis committee who's going to be in a position to approve your work. And your primary audience is going to be potential employers. If you're seeking a job at a university, you've got to think to yourself, what are hiring committees at university departments going to want to see in my research? And the answer is different depending on what field you're in. The answer is different depending on what kind of position you're going to be seeking. The answer is different depending on what country you're seeking employment in. The norms about what, for example, I'm in a law school. So my audience is primarily law faculty. But what law faculty prioritize in legal writing is going to be very different in France than it is in the United States, or than it is in India. And so recognizing the norms and the expectations of the relevant audience are very important. And that's something that's in my own experience working with grad students, and to be completely candid, in my own personal experience as a graduate student and as a professor, that's something that I haven't always remembered, and it's been important for me to remind myself of that. Now, the second thing I want to say about writing research scholarship is another issue that I see come up all the time with especially law students and PhD students that I work with, and that is the importance of developing a thesis. Now, that's I think something that all of you are familiar with. You've all had teachers tell you, oh, you need, what's your thesis, and giving you advice on how to write a thesis. But one of the things that I see very often as an editor of the Journal of Legal Studies in papers that I see submitted to me, submitted to the journal from all over the world, and I've seen this literally hundreds of times over the decade that I've been an editor of the Journal of Legal Studies, is there are submitted to me research papers. The research papers are very thoroughly researched by very careful, very smart, very thorough writers, professors, academics, students, but they have a fatal flaw. They have a fatal flaw, and any paper with this flaw I reject within 5 minutes of starting to read the paper. And that is, the paper has a topic, and the paper has a thesis, but the paper doesn't have an original thesis. And what I mean by that is the paper collects many ideas and arguments and bits of evidence that have been published by other scholars, that have been published by government statistical agencies, or by non-governmental organizations in their reports. And they collect all of this writing and all of this data, and they talk about it. And they basically report in their article what all of those studies have to say. They basically summarize information that exists in the literature that's already been published. Now, that's an informative article if you haven't read the papers and the books that the article is citing. But it's not original scholarship. It has a thesis, but the thesis is simply, here is a summary of what other people have written. And that, to me, is not what we should be doing as research scholars, as academics. We should be seeking to develop original research in order to make in each paper that we write an original thesis. And what that requires is going beyond studious and careful reading and summarization and synthesis and explanation of existing ideas, existing data, and existing scholarship. The question you should always be asking yourself when you are writing a paper is, what is my unique contribution? What am I adding to the body of human knowledge that no one else has supplied before? Now, that's admittedly a daunting question to ask yourself, the idea that you would be supplying something to all of humankind that has not been provided before. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you have to have a thought that no one has ever had before. That's very difficult to do, and all of us will have very few of those in our lifetime. But rather, what I'm saying is, your article that you are writing and that you are going to submit for publication somewhere, that article has to supply some information, either some empirical data or some argument, some analysis, some policy proposal, whatever it is. It has to supply something that has not been done before. So even if you're asking the same question that 100 other papers have asked before, are you providing new data to answer that question that other papers haven't provided? If you're using the same data that other studies have used already, are you analyzing that data using a different methodology than other papers have already used? If the answer to all of these questions is no, then what you are doing simply isn't new. What you are doing is a synthesis, perhaps, or a collection or a summarization of what's already been done, but you're not adding to what's already been done. And to a journal like the Journal of Legal Studies, that is going to be a fatal flaw in your scholarship. It lacks a novel contribution to the literature. And so I cannot emphasize enough the importance in your research of asking yourself, what is new in what I am doing? Again, to be clear, it's not that everything you do has to be completely original. In fact, that's a bad idea. Being completely original is actually a weakness of scholarship, and I'll explain that as well in a moment. But before I get there, I want to say that it is important that you have a contribution. What is your contribution What is your information, your methods, your analysis, your data that no other paper has yet to provide to the scholarship in your field? You have to be able to give an affirmative answer to that question. And in your article, what you have to do in the abstract of the article, and then again in the introduction of the article, and then of course again in the body of the article, is say what that is. What is your contribution to the scholarship, and why does it matter? We'll talk about why does it matter in a moment as well. But without a unique contribution of any kind, what you are doing is a literature review, which is a useful part of a paper to include, but it's not a thesis. It's not an original thesis, and that's what a journal like the Journal of Legal Studies or most other journals. There are some there are some journals that seek literature reviews because literature reviews are valuable for a different reason. They just summarize knowledge, and that can be useful. But the vast majority of selective journals are looking specifically for an original contribution. And if you cannot say explicitly in your abstract what your article is doing that others have not done, if the reader of the article is guessing whether or not you have something new, that's not going to be a successful article. Okay, so let me say a little bit about why it's important not to be totally original either. If you are asking a question that no one else has asked, that is unrelated to any question that anyone else in your field has asked, and then you are answering that question that has no connection to anything that anyone else has done in the field, that is original. But it's probably going to be an unsuccessful article. And the reason is that what's important to understand as a scholar, especially as a scholar that's a PhD student or a research scholar, a junior person, this is especially true. Scholarship, the goal of scholarship of an article, the goal of an article, or even the goal of a string of articles, or even the goal of a book, is not to exhaust our knowledge of some topic, is not to just state some new fact that we didn't know before. That is part of it. That's the novelty that I talked about, but that's not the complete. That's not the whole of it. And why do I say that? Why I say that is, there's no single article that you will ever write, or that anyone will ever write, that will be by itself a complete contribution to our knowledge. Every article that we write, every book that we write, is only a partial contribution to our knowledge. It's never perfect. There's always some flaw, and other people who are working in the same area will see what you're doing and will want to respond to it. They might think it's wrong. They might say, actually, I'm going to write 10 papers in response to your paper because I think your paper is completely wrong, and I'm going to spend the next 5 years of my life explaining why you're wrong. If the reaction of other scholars to your scholarship is, this person is wrong, and I'm going to spend the next 5 years explaining to the world why they're wrong, here's the secret. You are an incredibly successful scholar. You have made it if other people are spending their time trying to prove you wrong. So my point in all of this is to say, the goal is not to be completely original. Rather, the goal is to put yourself in conversation with other scholars. By putting yourself in conversation with other scholars, they are going to react to you. They'll say, oh, this person is brilliant, they're right, and here's another idea that I have based on their idea. Or they'll say, wow, this is a clever idea, but it's wrong, and let me explain to the world why your idea is wrong. Either way, here's the magic of scholarship. You now have an audience who cares about your work, and people are writing about what you wrote. You're getting citations. People are paying attention to you. People care about your ideas. And so the key is to put yourself in conversation with others. That's why it's important to say something original, because if you don't say something original, people don't have anything new to think about. But if you're 100% original and totally unconnected to what other people are doing, they don't know what to say, because they can't relate to what you're saying, because they want to talk about how their own work and their own ideas are connected to your work and your ideas. So you don't want to just completely come out of the blue with your ideas, but instead to have ideas that are grounded in the existing literature. That's why you do want to talk about the existing literature in your writing, but you want to make sure that it's original. Krishna, I see that you've turned on your screen. I just want to make sure you're not trying to get my attention. No, okay, great. Okay. Next important theme in writing, motivation. It's not enough to be original, and it's not enough to be original and to have your original contribution be connected to other people's original contributions. Those are both really important things, but there's one more thing. There's one more thing in addition to having an original contribution and to be connected to existing ideas and existing literature. There's one more thing that's crucial in terms of the topic, in terms of the question that you're asking and answering in your research, and that is motivation. Anybody who's reading your paper is going to ask the question, why should I keep reading? Why don't I just stop reading and read something else instead? Your paper has to answer that question in a way that ensures that they keep reading. And so what that means is, from the very beginning, in your abstract, and then again in your introduction, it's very important to provide motivation. In other words, why should I care? That's the question every reader is going to ask as they read your paper. Why should I care? Why should I keep reading? What am I going to learn that matters to me? And that's what every abstract and every introduction needs to successfully do in order to succeed as a research paper, as an article. Now, there are different ways in which something can be motivated. It could be that there's some problem in the world, like global warming, that we all care about, and you can explain, hey, my paper addresses a question that people have been asking about, how do we finance renewable resources? Well, here's how, right? Explaining why do we care about this this question. It could be from a practical point of view, like the example I just gave, or it could be that in the scholarship itself, there's an important question. In American law schools, there are huge debates about how to properly interpret the United States Constitution. Okay, so explain how your paper helps resolve a debate about the proper interpretation of the Constitution. Or in my own work, when a Supreme Court decision changes the way that judges decide cases, a question that naturally arises is, does this mean now that fewer cases can go to court? Okay, well, that's a question people care about. So I'm going to explain, look, we care about whether the court system is open to people who are injured. We're worried that this Supreme Court decision is going to reduce the number of cases that can go to trial. I'm going to answer the question of whether this Supreme Court case actually affects people who want to go to court. And I'm going to show it by quantitatively measuring changes in the number of cases that are able to go to trial in federal court. So that's the idea of motivating what you're doing, explaining why this matters to other people. One of the things that I see sometimes in my own students' work, when they try to give motivation, is they talk about why they started studying this question. And I'd say be very careful about that. It's okay when you're drafting a paper to write that down. Why did you study this question? But before you submit it to anyone else, you want to stop and take a step back and ask yourself, if I wasn't me, if I was a complete stranger, would I care about this story that I'm telling about why I'm studying this topic? And if the answer is no, then you gotta come up with a better motivation. You gotta come up with a better motivation. So that's just my my suggestion. You always remember the reader is asking, why do I care about this question? The reader is not asking, why did the author care about this question? And so make sure you motivate your paper in a way that that appeals to what is interesting to the reader. Okay, so those are the main kind of big picture, major themes to think about in terms of your scholarship and writing scholarship that's going to appeal to an audience of academics and hopefully appeal to journal editors when you submit it to journal editors for publication. Those are kind of the main themes. A couple of other things that I will say are when you're submitting to a journal, do some homework on the journal. Go to the website, read the journal's statement of its own mission, of its own subject matter. Look at recent issues, just the last couple of issues of that journal. What do their articles look like? How are they written? What's the style? What's the length of the articles? You know, some journals have very strict word limits. Often they're explicit in the on the journal's website. Sometimes they're not. But if you look at just the recently published articles in a journal, it'll become very obvious to you whether the journal is expecting an article that is 50 pages long or that is 6 pages long. And if you send a 50-page manuscript to a journal that expects something 6 pages long, the editors are not going to be happy about that. So style, length, obviously subject matter. You know, if it's an empirical journal, don't send a theoretical article to it. They're just not going to be interested. And so those are simple things you can do to make sure that you're matching your scholarship to the right journal. Another just simple practical bit of advice. The best, so here's, I think maybe this will surprise you, maybe it won't, but it surprises some people when I tell it to them. Who gets rejected more often by journals? The most successful research academics in the United States or the least successful research academics in the United States? The answer is the most successful ones. They get rejected the most. And the reason isn't that their scholarship is worse, it's better, obviously, that's the whole point of this. But the reason they get rejected more is because they submit more. And when they submit and get rejected, they go to another journal and submit again. The key is they're productive. They just write more articles and they submit them all. And if they get rejected, they just keep trying. Unsuccessful scholars don't write much. And even the stuff they do write, they don't submit to journals. And when they do submit it to journals and they get rejected, they give up. And so they don't get rejected very often. But the problem is they don't get accepted very often. And all that matters is how many times you're accepted by journals. Nobody cares. Nobody's ever going to look up or care how many times you were rejected by a journal. The only thing anyone ever cares about is how many times you were accepted by a journal. And so it's just important not to be discouraged if you get a rejection letter. Now, I will say, as someone who's gotten plenty of rejection letters himself, it's not fun. Nobody likes it. It feels terrible to get rejected. But I will say, the people I know who I admire because they are much more successful than I am. I have colleagues at my law school who I really admire and envy their productivity and their publication record. The difference between them and me isn't the quality of our work. I mean, the reason that I got hired is because I do good work, and the reason they got hired is because they do good work too. But the difference is they write more, and they keep submitting, and they get published even if it takes several tries. So for those of you who have gotten rejection letters and who feel discouraged, I just want to remind you of that very important fact about academic publishing. Another kind of practical tip about the writing process. Again, this is probably obvious to some of you, but it's or maybe all of you, but it's worth mentioning, is the importance of editing and the importance of taking editorial feedback. I like to say, I'm sure this has been said 1,000 times before by better writers than me, but it's a saying that I love to repeat as well, which is, there's no such a thing as good writing. There's only good rewriting. And I say that because of two things that happen, and I see this with students, PhD students and law students that I supervise in their research. One is, people write a first draft and they like it, and so they want to keep it. But the reality is, no first draft is particularly good. And if you think your first draft is good, just remind yourself that you're wrong and you need to keep editing and you need to keep improving the piece. That's just the reality of it. And if you're too wed, you're too attached to the way that you've written something on your first try, you're not going to allow yourself to improve. So editing and revision is an essential part of every process. Now, I just saw a little question bubble pop up saying, are there any tools for editing and proofreading that I recommend? I don't have any specific recommendations. I do know that in the last few years, the number of software applications and AI assisted tools for editing and proofreading of your writing has proliferated. There's many of them now, and my understanding is they're quite good. But having said that, it's important to recognize that AI tools are useful at summarizing information and are useful at cleaning up grammar mistakes and proofreading errors. So yeah, use them for that. But what AI tools, for example, can't do that humans can and should do is to think not just about, oh, how can I fix this word or that word? How can I make this sentence less complex? That's something AI tools do extremely well and have for a little while now. But instead, to ask the question, do I even need part 4 of this paper? Right? That's the kind of question that a human needs to exercise judgment about. There's no computer that can tell you whether part 4 belongs in a different article than the article you've currently drafted. That's something that requires human judgment. So what I would say is, don't grow attached to every word you've written. Be willing to discard what you've written and start over. It's not that you throw it away and never use it again. It's that if you've written something and you think it's really smart and it's well researched, don't throw it away completely. Just move it out of the paper if it doesn't belong there, and maybe you'll use it somewhere else someday. But you have to ask yourself, is what I am writing in this sentence, in this paragraph, in this section, in this chapter, is what I am writing contributing to the original idea that I am trying to develop in this paper? If the answer is yes, keep it. If the answer is no, take it out. No matter how much you felt you worked so hard on that section, if it doesn't belong, take it out. Save it for another day. You'll write more than one paper. And one of the things I'll say in this regard is, and I see this all the time, especially with PhD students, is they write a paper that's just so long and sprawling and it says so many things. I have to remind them, you can write more than one paper in your life. Your dissertation isn't your entire career. Your dissertation is just a dissertation. What's important is that each paper, each chapter have an original contribution and accomplish that. And if you have more ideas, separate them out and write more than one paper. You have your entire career ahead of you. You don't need to fit everything into the same dissertation or into the same article. So be willing to take stuff out. It sounds obvious, but I know from personal experience and from others, you know, you get attached to what you've written and you've worked so hard on it. You don't want to let it go. But it's very important to always be ruthless in cutting what needs to be cut from a paper, even if it's just to save it for later. And then the final thing I'll say in terms of major themes, and I see there's a question popping up about empirical studies, so I'll say a little bit about empirical research since that is an important question. The final thing I'll say is, if you get feedback, I'll say two things about feedback, and the two things are somewhat contradictory with each other. And this is, again, where human judgment is essential, because you can't always follow every piece of advice that you get, even the two pieces of advice that you're about to get from me, from the same person. So piece of advice number one is, it's very important to take feedback. Why? Even if you think that everything you've written is 100% correct, and everybody else is telling you you need to change this part of your paper, and you get it from your advisors, and you get it from your colleagues, and you get it from editors who say you need to change this, and you are so convinced that you are right and they are wrong, you should take that advice anyway. And I'll tell you why. The reason is, it goes back to what I said earlier. Scholarship isn't about ending a conversation. It's about continuing a conversation. It's about beginning a conversation. And so if others aren't getting what you're saying, change what you're saying so they can get it. And if you need to write another paper to then say that other thing that you had to remove from the first paper, that's fine. But if you're not responding to and taking the advice of others, you're not allowing your work to be accepted and absorbed and understood by your audience. And that's ultimately what's important, because you want to be part of a conversation. You want to contribute and add to that conversation. Now, the second thing I'll say that's a little bit in contradiction to the first thing is, you're going to get lots of advice. And here's the problem. You'll get advice from two people and they'll say the opposite thing about your paper. And so you can't take all of the advice that you get. And so ultimately, you're going to have to exercise judgment about what advice to take and what advice not to take. And that's just difficult, you know, and that's just difficult. And that's something that you'll have to work on. But one of the things to keep in mind as you decide which advice to follow and which advice not to follow is the very first thing that I said, which is, who is your audience? Who are the most important people that you have to impress with your scholarship? Follow the advice that helps you do that. Okay, that's kind of the ultimate principle there. All right, let me just say a little bit about empirical research. I think that empirical research, it's important to always do a few things. One, you need to be very explicit about where your data is coming from, how you got the data. If the data is something that's a pre-existing data set, you just have to document where it came from, what version, and make sure that the reader can access that data set themselves. Tell the reader, you know, this is where I got it. If you want to get this data set and look at it yourself, these are the steps you can take, right? So the idea there is transparency about the origin of the data. If it was a data set that you collected yourself and you created yourself, that's great. You know, original data is always impressive and always a good thing in scholarship, but you need to carefully document your process, your methodology for gathering the data. What was your criteria for including something in the data versus excluding it? What types of information did you collect? Was this interview based? Was this an online experiment? Was this a hand coding of judicial opinions, like we did, my co-authors and I did in our book on the Supreme Court of India? Was this scraping a website? That's something else we did in our book on the Supreme Court of India. Whatever it is, describe the process in as much detail as possible. The gold standard for writing about your data collection and creation methodology is, have you described your process sufficiently that if a person wanted to duplicate what you did and create the same data set that you created, they could read your article and successfully create a identical duplicate data set by simply following the instructions that you included in your article. That is the gold standard for describing your data collection methodology. Now, to be clear, that amount of detail should probably be in an appendix, not in the main body of the paper, because that's that's tedious to read. But that's the gold standard. All right, so that's point number one: transparency about the data and where it came from and how you got it and how you processed it. There's a lot of processing that goes. For those of you who do empirical research, you know what I'm talking about. Data is never perfectly clean, and you need to clean it up and look for errors and stuff like that. Okay. Secondly, you need to make sure that you are clear on what is the question I'm asking and how am I supposed to answer this question in the data. I see this all the time in papers that I review, either as a mentor or as an editor for a journal, which is the paper asks a very good question, it collects data, and then it uses the data to answer a question. The problem with the paper is that the question it answers with the data is not the question that the paper asked. So you have to ask yourself, what is my question, and how do I get data that actually answers that question? That sounds very simple, but look, people devote their entire career to trying to figure out how to get the right data to answer the right question. Now, there's a lot more I can get into in terms of empirical research, talking about descriptive versus positive, causally identified empirical methodologies and so on. I don't want to get into that because there are people in all sorts of fields on this call, and some fields are really concerned about causal identification strategies, like economics, and other fields are more interested in descriptive results, just saying, look, I went out into the field and this is what I saw. So I don't want to spend too much time on any one particular methodology. But what I said about the gold standard for gathering data and for connecting the data to the research question being asked, that's always true. It doesn't matter what type of empirical research you're doing. Okay, I've talked a very, very long time, and I am very grateful for your patience and for sticking with me in this very long talk. But I do want to leave a little bit of time here at the end for any questions that you might have or any follow-up that I can do.
Thank you very much, sir. So, any questions related to the current discussion?
Okay, I'm looking at the messages, the little chat messages. Let me see if I can identify any other questions here. There's a question about a systematic literature review. I'm not an expert in that, so I'm not going to sort of offer a checklist for a systematic literature review. I think that's a question that that you can look up the answer. You can look up the answer to. But it is important, like I said, you don't want your research to just be a literature review. It's important to have an original contribution. But any article that you write should include a literature review in the sense that you want to connect your ideas to the existing literature. Say, here's what people have already said, and here's what I'm adding. Here's what was missing from the existing literature, and that's the important part of writing original scholarship.
Good. There are few people who have raised their hands.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening, sir. May I ask a question right now?
Yeah, Brijesh, please go ahead.
Yeah, sir, as you discussed, we should focus on our audience if we are doing any research. So in this globalized world, research is interlinked with all the subjects. So how we can decide who will be our audience? Like my research is based on India and China, but in globalized world, every country is focusing on India and China. So how will we decide that who will be our audience in this research, and how will narrow down that audience?
Yeah, so what I would say is, if you are a PhD student or a researcher who's beginning your career, I think the way to think about it is, what are your professional goals, not your intellectual goals, not what knowledge do I want to bring to the world, but in a much narrower sense, like, what job do I want to get? And then once you answer that question, ask yourself, well, where do I need to publish? What kinds of publications does my future employer that I want to have, what kind of publications do they want to see? And then you want to say, okay, how do I write research that fits that? How do I tailor my research to that kind of audience? And so I just want to, but the answer really depends on what field you're in, what kinds of journal. Like, for example, in law, for an American lawyer, the answer is very straightforward. I need to publish in the most prestigious American Law Review or American Law and Economics journal that I can get published in, because that's what's good for my career, and that's the audience that I'm in conversation with. But it depends on what country you're in. It depends on what country you want to be in. It depends on what field you're in. I mean, the answer for sociology and the answer for library science and the answer for social work and the answer for political science are all going to be different than the answer for law. So, so I don't want to go into to too much detail about that.
Good, sir. I have a two-part question. You said that a lot of papers are where you review somebody else's work as research scholars and you summarize it, right? You receive a lot of papers like that. Now, the best suggestion that you have provided us is to read every paper that they have cited or every citation that they have cited. How do I decide which ones are the best for me? Because it's from my perspective, from an amateur writer's perspective, it is a little time consuming. Secondly, we may have all papers that they have cited, may have something or the other in common, but not every paper, as you yourself said, that every paper will have a limited knowledge. So how do I decide which ones are the best for me? Say a paper has 15 citations. How do I know which ones to pick? Or, maybe you could guide us in that way.
Yeah, well, I think in every respect, you want to be, in any paper you write, you want to be guided by what is the question I am asking in this paper. And so in terms of the what you need to read in the literature to connect to, you want to ask, what are the papers that actually speak to the question that I'm trying to speak to? And it's not that you need to read every paper on the general topic. So, for example, if I'm to use an example from my own research, if I'm studying the effect of a Supreme Court case on motions to dismiss, this is an old paper I wrote on motions to dismiss in federal court. I have to ask myself, what are the papers that actually say something about the way that a Supreme Court decision changes the dismissals of cases in lower courts? That's a pretty narrow question. So there's only going to be so many papers that are going to speak to that. Papers that are generally about the Supreme Court, or generally about motions to dismiss, or generally about the federal courts, I'm not going to read all those papers, because that's thousands of papers. I'd never get finished reading all of those papers if I tried. So you want to be focused on what's the question. The more that you write in a particular area, what you will find is you start to recognize some names come up again and again. You say, oh, I like that person. They're good. I'm going to read their stuff. And you start to familiarize yourself with, who are some of the key names in the field. And you want to make sure that if there are people in your area that are good scholars and you want them to like you, well, read their stuff and cite their stuff in your papers. And then once you've written your draft, send your draft to them and say, hey, I've written this paper, I'm citing your research, I think your research is really exciting, and here's something that I'm adding to what you've written. Can you take a look at my paper and give me feedback? That's a great way to get feedback from people who are good, and it's a way to get them to read it, because everybody loves to be cited by somebody else. So if you're citing their work, and then that gives you an excuse to then reach out to them and say, hey, can you look at what I've written? I'm citing your work. I think your work really is foundational to the work that I'm doing. I think that's a good strategy, not just for deciding whom to read and whom to cite, but it's also a way to then give yourself an excuse to reach out to people and to get feedback from them.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
There are few questions in the chat box. I will be reading them out. You can choose to answer any one. Like, is there any difference between legal research methodology and social science methodology, sir? Dr. Sajjan Malleshi is asking that question, sir. Another question, a PhD scholar, what's the correct way to validate the data?
Great.
There is one more question by Shubhas Srishti. You highlighted the importance of asking the right question and knowing the right kind of data that will address that question. Do you have a checklist or thumb rule that we should follow to do it scientifically and systematically?
Great. Yeah. So let me try to respond at least to some of these questions. So in terms of the difference between legal research and social science, any field of social science is going to have its methodologies, right? So if you study economics like I did, part of what you study in your PhD program is econometric methods for how to design an empirical study. The law is a little bit different in the sense that there are methods for how to talk about cases, how to interpret cases, how to reason, talk about jurisprudence and case law and doctrine and so on. But if you're using, if you're in the legal space, you're also often using social science methods. But what's interesting about the law is, because the law isn't economics, the law isn't sociology, the law isn't history. Sometimes people in law will use economic methods, and sometimes they'll use historical methods, and sometimes they will use sociological methods. And so the methods can be the same, but they might be, they might be different, and it really depends on your field. And again, what is your area and who is your audience? I'm an economist, so I'm not going to try to write history pieces in the law. I'm going to write methods using economics, even though I'm writing about the law. Let's see. There was a question about oh, phooey, I lost it here in the chat. So yeah, I mean, there is this question about how to find the right data that will address the question. That really depends on the question, right? So but I'll give you an example just to make it a little bit more concrete. So sometimes people will say, I want to empirically investigate whether this new law changed people's behavior. So I want to see whether this new law, a new, India or some other country rolls out a new law with, requiring biometric identification. And I want to know if this led to a reduction in cases involving fraud. And what they do is they collect all this data on how many fraud cases there were after the law was implemented. And I see papers like that all the time, and I have to reject them, because if the data is only after the law, how on earth can you answer the question about whether the law changed things from before to after? You only have the after piece. You don't have the before piece, right? So I mean, there's a million examples that you can give, and each one depends on the question you're asking. But the idea is, if you can have tons and tons of data, but if the data doesn't allow you to answer the question you've posed, you either need to get new data or you need to change your question. But again, it really depends on the individual situation. That's why I mean, look, that's why writing academic articles is so hard, because there's a million difficult questions. Let me. I know we're running out of time. Let me. Here's the book I mentioned. I know some people were asking in the chat. Does it? Does it? No, it's not going to work. Okay, I'll type it in the chat. It's called Court on Trial, a data-driven account of the Supreme Court of India. And the authors are Aparna Chandra. She's at Bangalore, NLU Bangalore. Sheetal Kalantri, she's at the Seattle University in the United States. And myself. And it's published in India, because we wanted this book to be for India, because it's about the Supreme Court of India. So it's published in India. It should be easily available in some bookstores, but obviously, you know, you can order stuff online. It's very easy to find online, either in, for example, Amazon in India, or in the United States, for that matter. And it's an imprint of Penguin, and it came out in 2023. So let me just put that in the chat there. That's the book. I think Krishna also gave us a shout out for some of the articles we've written. So thank you for that. I see that in the chat as well. There's a question about validating empirical data. You know, that's, again, that's a long conversation. We don't have time for that, but obviously that's an important question to ask. So I just wanted to note that.
So one person has raised the hand. How to maintain consistency to read materials before you start writing and citing it? I find it difficult to consistently read material. Is there any strategy?
Yeah, no, I laugh because I have the same problem. It's you know, it's hard to keep up with the writing in whatever area you're in, and that's something I struggle with as well. I think that in order to keep up with new research that's coming out, one of the things that I do is, if you go to SSRN, the Social Science Research Network, you can subscribe to news feeds. So you know, they can send you an email every day saying, oh, here are some recent working papers that have been posted, and that's a way to kind of see what people in a particular area are writing even before it gets published, to kind of see what's coming out. That's not a strategy for actually reading the papers. That's just a strategy for knowing what papers are out there. You know, I think that there are different strategies that different people use for actually writing. And I think that it really depends on the person what strategy works best for them. One strategy that I've used has been to, if there's an area that I'm interested in and I have a general idea of what kinds of questions I want to ask, but I don't know exactly what question to ask, I'll just start reading papers that I think are interesting in the area and see what kinds of questions I feel like they're missing. What are these papers missing? What are the questions they're not answering? And going from there. Other times, I'll just have an idea that I think is great, and I'll go out and I'll say, look, I'm going to try to find a paper that already answers this question. And if I can't find a paper that already answers this question, then I know it's an original question, and then I can write about it. But in the process of looking for papers that have already answered the question, I've found papers that are at least related to the question, and so I can try to read those. But to be honest, like, it's just a lot of time. I mean, reading scholarship is a lot of time. And what I would say is, and this goes to a question that I got earlier that was a very good question as well, which is, I can't read everything. How do I choose what to read when I can't read everything? And that's right, you can't read everything. And one of the dangers that people run into, especially PhD students, in my experience, in my observation, One of the dangers is they're so busy trying to read everything that's been written on a topic that they never end up writing their own stuff. And so what I would say is you can't write without reading, but it's important at some point to just start writing, even if you haven't read everything. And so don't feel overwhelmed that you have to read everything and, oh my gosh, how will I have the time to do that? It is important to read enough that you have a sense of what's out there. And one way to do that is to read recent papers and read their literature review sections and see how they describe the state of the literature. And that's at least a good summary of what's out there. And then if you see things mentioned in those literature reviews that are particularly relevant to you, read those. And that way you at least know kind of what the state of the art is, so to speak. What's the current state of affairs in terms of the literature by reading recent works that provide some background on the literature. You don't have to go back and read everything that's ever been written. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, sir. I assume there are no more questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for your time and for your interest. You know, I think it's so important for the sake of our community as academics, our community as scholars, and you know, as a lawyer, for the sake of the legal system and for the sake of our systems of government and our societies, that we continue to learn everything that we can about our world, whether it's through theory or through empirical research or doctrinal analysis. So I wish you all the very best in your research. Obviously, there's a million more questions for us to examine and explore, and a lot of difficult challenges along the way as you do your research. But I wish you the very best in all of your studies and in all of your research. And I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, sir. We are very much grateful for your time you have taken out from your busy schedule for us. We really thank you for your session, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Nice session we have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir.